Hello, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Susanna. It's really nice to see you. It's a pleasure as well to participate.
I'm really excited to link with you on this and to hear more about how your professional. I got tongue-tied as well. Then I was infectious. I don't know what happened.
I can't say participate, and
I can't say professional, which does not bode well for my questions. Right, I'll take a second run. Do you want to go from the top, shall we? Or it's up to you.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Cool. Hello, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Susanna. It's really nice to see you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this and excited to hear about how your practice and your wardrobe interrelate. I think particularly because of your research interest, this is going to be a particularly interesting one. So perhaps to set the scene, could you perhaps describe your professional relationship to dress? How do you relate to fashion in a professional context?
In a professional context, I've been an exhibition maker for many years, and I started really working with contemporary artists and contemporary designers. I then moved to a museum where I was working with a real diverse set of collections, from Egyptology to numismatics, zoology. But I think I'd always been really interested in fashion as a medium. And so there was a point where I decided to study for an MA, which led to a PhD. And the MA was looking at my exhibition making practice as I developed it over many years and focusing it on fashion. So I suppose that's when I first started bringing my kind of professional work and my personal interests together through the MA and the PhD, probably about 15 years ago now.
Okay, so it was a particular strand in your curatorial practice that you then got to expand through further study and research. I'm interested in the idea of those different elements running alongside each other in your early curatorial practice. How do you think that's influenced your work today?
Well, I think the thing is, I'd worked for many years in public museums and galleries, and I'd worked as an exhibition designer and then as a head of exhibitions in a museum in the Northwest in Manchester. And you're working constantly on a churn of exhibition and public event programs. The idea of research almost never really comes into it. And at no point in that churn of exhibition projects do you really get the chance to reflect. You know, you're working on 6 different exhibitions at the same time, a constant stream of delivery. And there was a point where I thought, actually, I'm curious to know what I'm doing now. You know, I've built up a practice of 20 odd years, but no one's ever asked me what I'm doing. And I decided to kind of ask myself, you know, what does exhibition making mean to me? And I found that the best way to investigate that, and certainly the best way to protect time to do it, was to go back to university in my late 40s and do another master's.
Yeah, that's brilliant to have that dedication and that self-reflection. And do you mind me asking, what was the answer? Or is that a work in progress?
Well, I think it'll always be a work in progress for as long as I'm practicing. But I think the answer did come through my PhD research. And I suppose, well, it wasn't the answer, but it confirmed that I am an exhibition maker. And actually, for me, a hands-on element, an actual making of an exhibition is really important. And I think it also reminded me, or it brought to light, that a lot of my exhibition making impetus is actually embedded in my original training, which was as a theatre designer. Which I hadn't really worked in professionally for much more than about 18 months when I first graduated. But I realized through through the reflective study in my PhD and MA, I realized that actually there was something really fundamental about what had pushed me into theatre design in the first place that was coming through in my approach to exhibitions and exhibition making.
And what is that? Is that scene making? Is it experiential? Is it objects and space? Or I don't know, how do you think those two fed each other?
Yeah, I think it's about, firstly, I think it's about stories and storytelling. And then I think it's about the telling of a story through an exhibition as a medium. And I do definitely see exhibitions as a medium in the same way that dance or literature or cinema or the novel is a form. It's a form of artistic work. So, you know, I have talked to people about how close sometimes my work has come to installation. But because I say that whatever projects I'm working on as an exhibition maker, they're always rooted in objects, that's what I think separates them from being installation art. No, they are exhibitions because they're always about objects at some point.
And I'm sure more on objects shortly and throughout this conversation, but through that we've touched on your definition as an exhibition maker and its relationship to your earlier careers and this compounding series of studies. Let's go further back if you're comfy doing that. What's your earliest memory that you're willing to share that relates to clothes?
You know, when I thought about this, it came, I haven't got a fantastic memory, but this came rocketing back into my mind. And I've got such a clear picture of it. I was about 4.5. It would have been my first school Christmas party. And I'm not sure what the rest of the outfit was, but I had a pair of white ankle socks. And there was a tiny band around the top of the ankle socks. And it was, I remember it being embroidered, but it probably wasn't. But the little pattern was of green holly leaves and red holly berries. Really, really small little holly sprigs around the top of these ankle socks. And what I remember about them is that they were this really sparkling white, this kind of really, really luminescent white. And, you know, it was probably some appalling synthetic fabric or unicorn hair. I'm not sure which. But both. But yeah, I remember being incredibly fond of them. I must have worn them for the school Christmas party. And then I remember an occasion, you know, weeks or months later, asking my mum for them and my mum saying she couldn't find them. And being utterly bereft.
Yeah.
And I think she was probably saying she couldn't find them because they wouldn't have fitted me anymore. But I remember thinking, oh God, you know, they were like dream socks and then they're gone. So that is my earliest memory.
That's brilliant. I'm thrilled that it came rushing back for the interview as well. And I think it's really nice and really striking that also it's, while they were luminescent and very significant as a piece, they're an everyday item and that they're a sock, if you see what I mean. I think that's really, really interesting. And also, yeah, you saying that brought back a memory for me of, I haven't really thought about this, but the extreme loss of growing out of things as a child. And some of my memories, I grew up on a street where there were lots of children and we passed clothes down between us, and I remember growing out of a particular dress, and I knew that if I left it at home when I went to school that day, my mum was going to give it away, so I tucked it under my arm. You know, that thing of, yeah, your parents managing this grieving process in a way as you grow out of things. In terms of the socks themselves, do you think that memory is so striking maybe because of that loss, because the association with that party and occasion, or is it sensory? Is it literally because they stand out in your memory?
I would say, as a memory for me now, I would say it's absolutely sensory. You know, the party I have no memory of. What else I wore with the socks, I have no memory of. It's absolutely sensory, and it is the whiteness. It's this memory of this peculiar, like I said, luminescent whiteness. And you know, I'm sure most ankle socks that 4.5-year-olds own probably aren't snowy white, but I'd probably never worn them before. You know, they were probably brand new. And yeah, I can still remember being kind of entranced by how white they were, but a particular kind of whiteness. Like I said, this really opalescent, luminous nylon whiteness. I think it's interesting what you said as well about them being quite a humble item, and I wonder if there's a gendered thing here. And I wonder, you know, if you asked someone who was identifying as female at the age of 4.5 or 5, whether it would be like a party dress or something, or a dressing up dress. And I wonder if, certainly in that period, in the late 60s, boys' clothing was probably just so much more ordinary than girls' clothing.
Yeah, that's so true. So maybe these socks were so extraordinary because of their contrast to your everyday wear in a way, or, you know, they were your bright point within your outfit.
You know,
that's the fact where the rest fades away.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It really could have been, because, you know, the rest of the week I'd have been in a grey school uniform with grey socks. Here's
to the great socks of the world. Did that then feed, I'm trying to think how to word this. Does the socks as a standout item, is that associated with this particular memory that's come back, or do you have pinpoints like that run through other childhood clothing memories, perhaps?
I think I do have pinpoints, and I think, again, I was thinking about this when you asked me to do this session, and I was thinking that there's a point where those memories of clothing all start becoming about contested situations with my parents.
Okay.
You know, there's probably at least half a dozen things that I can think of that I really wanted, that my parents were saying no to, and that, you know, I either just caused such a strop until I got them, or I caused such a strop until I didn't get them. And, you know, that would have been around 12, 13, 14. And again, I kind of, it made me start thinking now, because I get the impression now that young teenagers are so much more grown up than I was when I was that age, and probably have so much more freedom. Whether that kind of life turning point of when you first start designing your own dressed identity, and you do run into conflict with your parents or the, you know, those authority figures. I wonder if that happens now, or even if it happens at such a much younger age.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating to explore. Like, what are the rebellions? What are the contentions? But yeah, at what point is it happening, and does that shrink over time? And how formalized is that rebellion or that need of distinction? I think it's definitely around role models. I was personally always aspiring to the girls a few years older than me and things, and I think it was very insular in a way. Whereas now I imagine it's much more external influence around it. Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. And also the idea that your memory is associated not only with, I mean, with the socks, it was so perfectly about yourself and about your experience of them, and then brightening you and brightening that memory. And then with these more contentious memories, it's about clothes as a relationship with other people, perhaps. Do you think that's how you remember clothes largely?
You know, that's a lovely point as well. I think maybe there is a point with children where they are the center of their own worlds.
Yeah.
And certainly as a 4.5-year-old, I was the center of my own world. And yes, yeah, then there's a point where I'm trying to make my own choices and I'm going into conflict with my parents. I mean, your question about whether I always remember clothes with people, you know, I'm not so sure about that. I think almost as I get older, they exist in memory as objects. And this maybe goes back to what you were asking about the socks, because they're memories of the experience of the object, you know, the color of it or the feel of it. And so, no, I'm not sure that my clothing memories, you know, other than those things about arguing with my parents for a brown corduroy safari jacket.
Which I hope you got in the end, or at least we should find you one now.
I did. I got it. And I got it for my first ever trip to London with the school when I was 11 and a half.
Great.
I think now memories are much more, not even event associated. It's almost as if the clothes exist as objects in their own worlds, in their own right.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm sure that, well, I was about to make a presumption. As I say, I presume that relates to your practice. Do you think your relationship to objects, even when they're your own, or perhaps almost when your memory acts as an object, do you think that's influenced by your practice, or do you think that's a growing relationship with clothing more generally?
I think, I mean, I've never thought about that, but I think it could be to do with how I look at objects in my practice. And I think I do look at them with a degree of kind of professional distance, because in a way I'm always looking for the use of that object. I'm looking for what purpose is it going to serve in the stories that I want to tell. And yeah, maybe that slight distance of the object being something that serves a purpose, maybe that does transfer a little bit to my memories and my own relationship to my clothing. Yeah, maybe it is.
Well, maybe it's meeting or melding between the two. So they're a personal pinpoint, a sensory pinpoint, but also you literally have distance from them, but also perhaps your practice allows you to have some distance.
Yeah.
Interesting interventions. So we've spoken about items that have sadly been lost or, you know, are childhood associated. Do you have any items in your wardrobe or in your home that you consciously keep but no longer wear?
Oh, this is the shame of having to admit that actually I've got quite I've got quite a bit that I don't wear.
I'm with you, don't worry. This is a safe space.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's interesting. You know, I've never really collected. I've never really been a collector. I think I accumulate things, and the things that I accumulate are probably books. They used to be CDs, but I don't accumulate them any longer. There are clothes in my wardrobe that I no longer wear and haven't got rid of them because it's a really interesting question. I don't know. They still have a kind of value in a way that would make giving them to charity seem inappropriate. I do give a lot of stuff to various charity shops. And also, I mean, this sounds really crass, but I kind of remember how much I paid for some of them.
Yeah. No, I think that's understandable. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, when I think of, you know, when I first thought about this question about things that I've kept, the first thing that came to mind is I've got a pair of Levi's 531s, which were, I think, quite rare, which I bought in 1987.
Great.
Have disintegrated to the point where they are, probably for the past 15 years, they've just been a pair of cut-off shorts that are darned and mended and repaired and, you know, barely hanging together. But if I ever go on a beach holiday, they always come with me. And so I'd probably say, you know, for the past 12 or 15 years, they've only ever been worn on beach holidays.
Yeah.
And they've got a certain kind of patina now. But there's also, even when I think about them, I start smiling because there's just this blissful sense of switching off embedded in them now. And like I said, yeah, I bought them in 1987, so they've lasted really well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fair enough if they've changed for more, you know, comparatively threadbare or need a patch or two. I think that's wonderful, both the idea of comfort and being embedded in them, and them being a marker of passing time and of usage. I love objects, or I love items in my wardrobe that show I've enjoyed them, or that tell a story in that way. But also the idea that they're activity or kind of context specific. So they are in active use, but they're in rare use, but you know that they're ready for you. And also maybe by keeping them, particularly in the current time that we're recording this interview, maybe by keeping them, you know that they will be in active use soon. You will be on a beach again in the future, and they'll always be waiting for you.
Isn't that just a really blissful thought?
Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting when you mention about the current time and how or whether the COVID situation has changed relationships to clothing. Something that I've realized is, you know, I'm sitting in my flat 7 days a week now. And I'm sure to a lot of people this would have been very obvious without COVID, but it's made me realize how little I need. And as I said before, I'm not really someone who accumulates a lot of objects, but it's made me conscious of the fact that I've got more clothes than I really need. And so now I feel, I wouldn't say desperate, but I feel a really keen sense of wanting to shed some. So, you know, those things that I mentioned that I know I'm not going to wear again, but I keep because I feel like I paid a certain amount or whatever. I keep thinking of, so where can they go? How can I get rid of them? So yeah, there will be a fairly substantial editing out process maybe over the summer.
Yeah, that's so curious. Yeah, I'm thinking whether there should be some sort of conscientious place that curators can shed their clothes, as you say, because I feel like it is a particularly emotional experience. I mean, I can't speak for others, but only for myself. But this ongoing connection, and as you say, yeah, then maybe you would feel able to take that step. But to do it in a considered manner, and also then maybe it could become part of their stories where they go to. That'd be interesting to know. How about where do you keep your clothes? And I'm not asking for a house tour, but more like, is it in a wardrobe? Are they arranged in a very categorical way? Do you think that your profession has influenced the way you care for them?
They're in wardrobes. They're in wardrobes in the bedroom. And now, has my profession influenced how I care for them? Without being a curator, I'm quite a kind of well-ordered person. So I can't say that how I keep them is influenced by my profession, but I think there's something about how I do order and structure things that works in my profession as well. So actually, it was when I was talking earlier about going back to college and doing an MA. The MA that I did then was about looking at what might be considered dysfunctional relationships in relation to clothing. So I was looking at obsessiveness. I was looking at maybe autistic spectrum disorder behaviors in relation to clothing. And one of the research activities I did was a piece where I took all of the clothes that I would normally store folded. I took them all into college. I put them all in a pile on the floor, and I took an ironing board and a folding board and filmed myself refolding them all and then piling them on a shelf in a kind of chromatic scale. And that actually was how I kept them at home.
Yes.
But it was a really fascinating thing to put that almost formal process under scrutiny through, I suppose, a kind of audience-less performance. And yeah, it's like, it's a normal, that's really ordinary for me to do that. And then you realize that actually not everyone does it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's wonderful you're almost the reverse of my question, where your personal practice or relationship or activity that also affects how you care for your clothes and care about your clothes has ended up informing and being a part of your practice, particularly consciously in that project. I think it's really, really fascinating, particularly because, to be honest, quite often when I ask a curator that, they're sort of embarrassed and would never let a photographer it in. What do you think you learned from exposing or documenting that part of your care of clothes?
In some ways, it was about exploring where and what kinds of narrative can you get from clothes. And so it was almost the performing of a narrative. It was a performing of this physical act of folding things to a certain size and then placing them within a chromatic scale. And for me, I mean, what I did was I related it back to work by the architect Charlotte Perriand. And Charlotte Perriand, when she was working with Le Corbusier, had designed these apartment blocks, and the interiors of the apartments had been designed in huge detail. So, the fitments of the apartments were designed down to the level of shelves and bookcases and cupboards in the kitchen. And Perriand's work for these interiors was all based around a basic building block. So everything in these flats, everything in these apartments was based around this very kind of human-sized building block. And so in a way, I was relating that building block of the size I folded my clothes to that idea of how you can construct, I suppose, a much bigger sense of your life around those physical relationships and physical patterns. And, again, maybe it sounds a little bit eccentric, but it was extremely practical in that the size that I folded things down to fitted into a suitcase that I had.
Yeah,
so if ever I had to pack, I could just get, it was there instant. It takes me hardly any time to pack.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. So it's a relationship towards other activities, other aspects in your household and other imprisonments, but also I love that widening of other kinds of practices or insights into it. And when you were talking about the idea of it as almost as a brick, I was thinking, or as a human brick, was that the phrase? Sorry.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. It's a nice phrase. I don't remember saying that.
Yeah.
There was something about exploring Charlotte Perriand's work that made me feel actually, it might seem eccentric, but there's something incredibly, I'm not sure what the word is, not structured, but that's sensible. There's something very sensible about it. And that an architect can use that same sense of sense to construct whole apartment blocks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the different applications of it is fascinating. It also makes me think, this is a tangent and I'd love to talk to you about it another time, but it makes me think of the architecture of wardrobes, and that both in terms of, architecture of biography or relationship to the person, but also just literally as a structure and space, and what you can achieve within it. but I'll keep us on track for now.
Okay,
another time in relation to your research. How about how you actually get dressed? So I was really interested within that there was a relationship with your practice and your research and this performative element of thinking about how you maybe care for, prepare and store your clothes. How about actually getting dressed in the morning? Is it something you plan in advance? Is it spontaneous? Yeah, what's your approach?
I mean, again, thinking about COVID, the whole idea of getting dressed in the morning is barely exists. That thought of waking up at 7:30 and thinking, well, I'm going to walk to work. What shall I wear? I haven't done it for a year, so it feels very distant. I mean, your earlier question about wardrobes and storage. The clothes I wear for work are probably within one wardrobe. So that would be the first step. I do think, yes, sometimes I will think the night before, what am I going to wear tomorrow? Particularly if there's a special session or a special meeting that I know I want to make a bit of an effort for. But I think I don't really over plan. I think I've got a set of clothes that pretty much kind of go together. And I wouldn't say that's happened deliberately at all. I think it's just that the thing, what I like is probably quite limited. So yeah, I don't really over plan. I don't really overthink. Sometimes, yes, I do think the night before, what am I going to wear? But it's actually, for me, it's a fairly casual process. Because you never really know what the weather's going to be like.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a fool's errand to plan too far in advance when living and dressing in London, I think.
Exactly, yeah.
But in a way, what you described, I was thinking maybe subconsciously or otherwise, you've already done the preparation in the editing and collating of a wardrobe where you feel comfortable and you feel equipped, and therefore whatever you choose will serve you in a way. Whether that's your Levi's for particular beach occasions or whether that's knowing what clothes you're comfortable wearing to particular kinds of meetings.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say there is a kind of dynamic that probably does relate very much to what people would see as curatorial practice. There is a kind of compartmentalization. So, there are kind of sets of clothes that would never cross into another world. And yeah, my work set is probably a set of clothes that are pretty much what I would wear for work.
Yeah.
In the same way that what I would wear around the house is a very, very distinct set, which was why it was so confusing when COVID started. And I was wearing clothes I would normally just wear in the house for a meeting, and it felt a bit awkward and uncomfortable.
There's blurring of identities and blurring of literal wardrobes. I did catch that you have a work wardrobe, literally, not just in terms of a set of garments you feel suited to that occasion. That kind of leads me. Oh, sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's not that rigid, but yeah, I would say most of my work clothes are probably in one wardrobe. But again, for me, it's about practicality. I only need to open one door.
Yeah. Efficiency, streamlined, but still closely connected. I think that's a really interesting balance, and again reflects or intersects with your practice. I think you've kind of touched on it there in this, consciousness that you might consider or you might dress particular occasions, but also that you had what I think a lot of his experience of this slight shock value of meetings on Zoom and dressing for being at work within your home. But I'm always interested with curators and exhibition makers about how perform, if they feel any pressure in terms of the way they dress, if ever you've been in a situation where you think people might have an expectation of what you as a fashion curation, fashion exhibition maker might dress like, look like, what people expect of you.
No, I haven't. But I think what balances that is that I have my own expectations. So I think it's probably more motivated by my own expectations, rather than thinking about how might someone else expect a fashion curator to dress. No, I don't think that's something I really respond to.
Yeah, that's good. So it's internally motivated. Is that, how would you define that? Is it motivated by your personal style, or do you mean motivated to inhabit that identity, if you see what I mean? Is it purely in terms of your own relationship to dress, or are you also thinking about that professional role?
I would say it's my relationship to dress, but it's also mine and the clothing's relationship to the occasion.
Okay.
So for instance, there was a really funny occasion about 18 months ago. Gosh, last time I went to a conference. And I always get quite nervous at conferences if I'm delivering a paper. So I would make kind of effort. And I remember wearing a suit with an apron, and it's a long apron, quite almost kind of mid shin length apron. And the paper that I gave was about notions of queer in relation to curating, not in terms of the subject, but the kind of verb of queering as a way of questioning curatorial tropes. And at the end of my paper, and at the end of a couple of other papers, when we were sitting having questions, someone asked me if I'd worn the apron. Well, she asked me what it was, and I said, oh, it's an apron. And she said, have you worn that to queer the conference?
Oh.
And I thought, not necessarily. I thought, no, actually, you know what it is to a degree is it's a kind of armor. It's something that I feel a bit protected in. And then afterwards, afterwards I was thinking, because you always think afterwards of a much cleverer answer. And afterwards I was thinking, I wish I'd just said, I've queered the conference by being here. Doesn't matter what I wear.
Yes,
Forget what I'm wearing, I've queered it by being here. But I thought it was really funny that someone in the audience picked up on what I was wearing and was asking about whether there was significance behind it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in that particular that's particularly pertinent in that context, that conversation, that subject, but it's something I've definitely experienced myself of it feeling people feeling comfortable questioning your own dress question. I mean, I suppose I'm doing it right now, so I have to hold my hands up, but of feeling that that's open ground, or that it's a part of the conversation, when really there's a distinction between your subject and your students.
Do you mind if I ask then, so how did you feel about it when it happened to you?
To be honest, it varies massively. I do think some of it might have been gendered. So a lot of it happened when I worked on an exhibition about wedding dresses, and some of it happened when I was working on an exhibition about underwear. So you can imagine some of the conversations I had in both of those cases. I think when it comes up more generally, it's maybe felt less contentious. I've had situations where I've turned up for a talk and people have literally said, oh, I thought you'd be like a 50s pinup. I thought you look like your subject, which I have to say I thought was more their problem than mine. To be completely honest, I think early in my career I did feel more of a pressure to perform, but then that's where the line gets blurry, because I also really care about clothes and I really enjoy getting dressed. So, but yeah, it's not the same experience at all, but I do think, yeah, it stands out to me when it's been an instance where it's like you're making a personal projection onto me by asking that question about my clothes. And that's different from talking to me about my research subject or practice.
Absolutely. I mean, and of course, the difference here is that we both understand what we're talking, we both understand the nature of this conversation. So you're not asking, I'm not surprised by the questions because I know why I'm here and what I'm doing. I mean, I've got to say, it never occurred to me at that split second that what she was doing was slightly inappropriate. The first thing I wanted to do was to answer the question. But afterwards, I thought, that's a really bizarre thing to say in front of an audience, an international conference of like 200 people. But I've got to say, she did email afterwards and apologise. So
okay, that's good. And did you well, I mean, it's great that she apologised, but also did you get to get your better answer in? We've all had it where we think of what we shall reply in, but did you say it?
No, I didn't. I just said, don't worry, you didn't faze me too much, and I appreciate you apologising. It was kind of like it was over. The better answer that you think of 2 days later, it's 2 days too late.
Yeah, absolutely. Time to heal. I'm absolutely loving the conversation and wish we could talk for hours, but I'll ask 2 more questions and then bring us to a close. I'm slightly in contradiction of myself here in terms of what we've just discussed, but I'd be really interested to know if any projects you've worked on have influenced the way that you've dressed, or if you found yourself leaning towards particular styles, perhaps after working on a particular project.
No, I really don't think they have. But I did think I've in some ways, my academic work around fashion curating, my writing is probably a slightly bigger body of work than the exhibitions that I've curated, because most of the exhibitions I've curated weren't specifically to do with fashion until very recently. I did do a really small exhibition on Comme des Garçons a couple of years ago, and I do like wearing clothes by Comme des Garçons. And again, almost from a kind of practical aspect, you know, you can get a suit and it's made from nylon and you can stick it in the washing machine. That's just so brilliant. And I suppose that's one exhibition where I did kind of feel a connection, except that all of the material I was showing was women's wear, because the collection I worked with didn't really have much menswear in it. But yeah, I did feel that it didn't impact on how I dressed, but I felt that I had an understanding of it, and I had an understanding of it through direct experience of wearing it, but also even of, you know, seeing things and handling them in the shop.
Yes, definitely. So in a way that perfectly brings us back to your first answer, where it's a sensory understanding that makes something so significant. So perhaps it didn't directly influence your style, but your understanding, your direction of that exhibition was informed by your own personal style, and therefore your personal experience of those garments.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in very subtle ways, and maybe in ways that weren't really visible to viewers, but I think even just working on it, I had a sense of connection, a sense of personal connection.
Yeah, definitely. Fascinating. So I close with the same question in each of the interviews I'm doing this series. I have to be honest, I think you've covered it already more than most, but let's do it all the same for consistency. How do you think your personal and professional relationships with clothes coexist in your wardrobe?
I think there's a degree of separation, and I think there always has been for me. I love work, I love what I do, but I also love switching off. And for me, part of that switching off is putting on clothes that I would never wear for work. And I think that kind of sums it up, really.
Yeah, definitely. There we go. I think that so succinctly puts, because we've focused on the clothes you do wear for work, but that really beautifully inverts it, and the implication that maybe those clothes are so importantly confined or refined for workwear, so that you're able to make that distinction, that switch within yourself, and take that pause.
Absolutely, yeah. They kind of enable that transition in a way. Yeah. And you know, if I wasn't working and I was left to my own devices, I'd probably look pretty much of a mess all of the time.
But a glorious, comfortable one.
Absolutely a glorious, comfortable mess, yeah.
With that beautiful visual in mind, I think I'll try to close. But I love that idea. I love the idea of a controlled distinction within our wardrobes in relationship to dress, and therefore using dress and clothes to ignite different moods and relationships in context.
That's a brilliant way of summing it up, yeah.
Yeah, with the sensory running throughout. So here's to luminescent socks.
Oh, thanks very much, Susanna. That was
thank you. It was such a pleasure, and thank you so much for covering both your personal and professional approaches. Thank you, and thank you all for watching.